Welcome to Fox Soul's Black Report, your space for black news, views, and opinions. Today is Thursday, January 13th, 2022. I'm Seth Lemon.
I'm Neo.
I'm Romeo.
I'm Demi Lobo. And on today's report, the push for voting rights heats up as we approach Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday. And Pastor Jamal Bryant is here to discuss voting rights and the pastor's hunger strike.
Also, U.S. Justice Department is forming a unit to counter domestic terrorism. Tupac's sister sues executor of Rappers Estate for embezzlement. And Fox Soul celebrates its 2 years, and the visionary James DuBose is here to join us and celebrate.
Lots to talk about today, and you know how we do it from our perspective because it's our voice and our truth. So let's get to it. Here are your headlines for today. Congressional Black Caucus members are calling foul play on voting rights. In a press conference on Wednesday, the CBC called out Senator Joe Manchin for essentially helping Republicans disenfranchise vulnerable voters, particularly minorities, while threatening to erode decades of civil rights protections in the process. Now, Rep. Sheila Jackson Lee revealed a 5-page letter she sent previously to Manchin and made it clear that she was frustrated with what she said was his subsequent silence. Take a listen.
I sent this 5-page letter to Senator Manchin. I've given him enough time to respond. I will make it public now. And it only suggests if he could have the courage of West Virginia that succeeded from Virginia because they did not want to support slavery.
Rep. James Clyburn, the most powerful black lawmaker in Congress, noted that every member of the Black Caucus has supported Manchin's scaled-back Freedom to Vote Act, despite their preference for stronger legislation. And I mentioned this yesterday, that it's Manchin's bill, and now he's holding up his own bill. Now, what we do know is that last night, the House passed a bill to combine both the John Lewis as well as the Freedom to Vote Act. We know that President Barack Obama delivered a support of the filibuster in the USA Today op-ed opinion. And we know that Vice President Kamala Harris called out Sinema and Manchin as well. So as we approach the King holiday on Monday, things are ramping up. People are speaking out, specifically black and brown leaders, to say that we need the passage of voting rights so that everybody has the right to vote in this country.
It definitely needs to happen. It's a smack in the face what's going on right now. It really is. But if you think about it, remember the George Floyd Policing Act was supposed to pass on the 1-year anniversary of his passing? That did not happen. And I'm hoping we don't get past MLK Day and do not have results and have what we want and what we need as far as this bill as well.
You know, some of this I feel like Manchin actually believes in. Some of it I feel like he's just sitting back and enjoying the ride. He made a statement where he said, my phone is ringing off the hook right now. Oprah Winfrey's called me. Barack Obama's called me. Bill Clinton has called me. And so I just feel like he has two options. The choice is clear what he needs to do, and he's made it clear what he wants to do. He can either save democracy or destroy it. I want to make sure I write it down because that's very, very important there.
It's interesting. This is not a good look for Republicans. Fighting against these things and these bills, adding on voting days, making it a federal holiday. These are things that should exist and will make it easier for everyone to vote. All right, now moving on to other news. Prices continue to rise for just about everything. Inflation jumped to its highest level since Ronald Reagan was president. Now, President Biden is claiming that this is just going to be a temporary thing we're seeing, but economists say it's not that easy and prices won't be coming down anytime soon. Consumers are paying more to fill up their shopping carts. A new report on the surge in inflation year over year from December showed 7%, putting it at a 40-year high. So high, in fact, millennials and anyone younger have never seen such a big jump.
The numbers that came out today only confirms what the American public already knows. It's more expensive to fill up your car at the gas pump. It's more expensive at the grocery store.
Rising inflation eating away at strong gains in wages and salaries American workers have seen in recent months.
It functions like a tax on all Americans, and that's what working everyday Americans are feeling every day.
President Biden touted the decline in month-over-month inflation down slightly from November, as Wall Street seemed to shrug off the red-hot report.
This is a market that's looking right through Omicron, looking through inflation, seeing that the economy is in rebound mode.
Tuesday, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell told Congress the Fed was prepared to accelerate interest rate hikes it plans to begin this year if it deems them necessary to curb high inflation.
The market understands that the Fed, even if it starts delivering rate hikes faster, it's not going to remove so much stimulus as to derail what is, I think, a sense that this is a riskless time to be investing. It isn't.
Now, this month's inflation reading, it marks the 7th month in a row that this gauge has been above 5%. People really feeling the pinch in their pockets.
Senators John Ossoff and Mark Kelly have introduced a bill that would ban members of Congress and their families from making stock trades while in office. So the bill, dubbed the Ban Congressional Stock Trading Act, would require that all sitting members of Congress, their spouses, and dependent children divest from certain investments or transfer them into a qualified blind trust within 120 days of the legislation being enacted. Incoming members of Congress and their families would have to do the same within 120 days of taking office.
2 Oklahoma death row inmates are asking the judge to allow them to be killed by a firing squad instead of lethal injection. The attorneys argue, while it may seem gruesome, it will be quicker. An emergency medicine specialist from Texas testified that it would likely be so quick the inmates would feel nothing. And unlike a lethal injection, the chances of botching the job is much lower. Judge says he'll make a decision by the end of the week. So this had me thinking. I wanted to look up some numbers from 1890 pretty much up to today's date. Here in the United States, it's botched 7.1% of the time when we talk about injections. That's more than anywhere else in the world. And also, even we talk about gas chambers, 5.4%. But they do say if it does happen by fire execution, it's a 0% chance that it will be botched. That's a pretty strong statement. They will want that to happen. You know, it sounds very, very harsh, but maybe they should have that right to ask for that.
Prison reform needs to happen just like criminal justice reform. We've had several conversations, and we know that the business of privatized prisons is horrific when it comes to black and brown people. It's how law enforcement, district attorneys, collude together to put people in jail, because we have to remember that everybody in that prison represents a price tag. There's a cost that comes when people are in prison, and it's a business and it's making money. So we have to find a way to where our prison system is about rehabilitation and getting people back out into society instead of keeping them locked up in cages with lack of nutrition, with high bills. It's just horrific, and it needs to change.
This story, I was so passionate about this story, and it almost made me cry because I feel like firing squad is just such an awful way to die, just in my eyes. With firing squad, it's 4 high-powered rifles that shoot you right into the heart. And so there was a man that said he was already shot in the heart before, and so he felt like, hey, you know what, I've already been shot in the heart before. This will feel no pain. And Romeo, back to your point about Oklahoma and the botched executions, there was a man named John Marion Grant who suffocated to death on his own vomit because his execution was done the wrong way, because they do a sedative. And so it is just so sad the way that we even have to talk about this. And what was also interesting was Oklahoma execution doctor, he gets paid $15,000 every time an execution is done. And so there's big money in this for sure.
Absolutely.
Detainees in a Rikers Island jail say they are on a hunger strike in protest of horrid conditions and a lack of basic services. According to the Daily News, around 200 inmates are participating in a hunger strike in 4 dormitories containing about 50 detainees each. Now, the action represents an escalation of long-standing issues within the troubled city's jail system, continuing problems surrounding lack of staffing, COVID-19, and correction department mismanagement has made 2021 one of the worst years of Rikers Island in memory. And like I said, this country needs prison reform.
16 people died in Rikers last year, and of the 5,400 people, the estimated inmates in the facility, most of them are awaiting trial. When we look at the people who are there, they are still waiting to be sentenced or convicted of anything. So for them to be dealing with these conditions, and many of them there for extended periods of time, just waiting for the justice system to play out, it's unfair that they are having to deal with this, and we shouldn't look at them as any less. They are still members of society who are innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely. And that's my biggest fear, is that I'm worrying, will they care that these are incarcerated people going on a hunger strike? But what makes me optimistic is that correctional offices, they're saying that when you go on a hunger strike in jail, that gangs come together, everybody comes together for one cause. So I think that this might get their attention and might actually do some good. That's what I feel. All right. So prosecutors in Missouri, they're saying that they won't file any charges in the murder of Justin King, who was a Black and Filipino man, and he was fatally shot by his white neighbor last year. Police allege the 28-year-old was shot while attempting to break into the neighbor's home in their trailer park community, which is more than 70 miles south of St. Louis. The coroner deemed King, who was shot 3 times, he died by a justifiable homicide. His family and the Missouri NAACP have condemned that finding and the prosecutor's decision not to charge his killer. The Crawford County Sheriff said that King forced his way into the neighbor's home, and residents in the community say the two were friends who frequently socialized.
Well, a Minneapolis judge has agreed to delay the state trial for 3 of those police officers charged in the death of George Floyd while their federal trial plays out. The judge did not set a date yet, but told attorneys to agree on a new date within the next year. They'll have to inform the court of that decision by Sunday. The 3 former officers face charges of aiding and abetting murder and manslaughter. The trio's federal civil rights trial starts next week.
The leading cause of death on the police force today isn't gunfire or traffic accidents, but it's the coronavirus. Nationwide, more than 250 officers have died from COVID-19 so far this year, including more than 20 in the month of October alone. According to National Database of Law Enforcement Deaths, COVID-19 deaths are responsible for 65% of all deaths on the force this year, and more have died from coronavirus than all other causes combined. Now, that includes motorcycle and automobile crashes, stabbings, training accidents, weather, and gunfire. Now, this comes as police unions nationwide are fighting requirements that mandate members to get vaccinated.
My only problem with this story is that the New York Times posted this story, but they didn't say the amount of people that were vaccinated with those numbers of the police officers. And we know that vaccinations is a really big sticking point for cops around the world right now.
I agree, but if you think about Los Angeles, more than 1,000 LA area police officers and firefighters out due to COVID. I mean, we're short help out in the streets, right? So it's a good thing that the crime isn't as high as it really is, because we need that protection on the street. We saw what happened in the story we're going to talk about later in a building in New York City when the fire erupted. So there's things like that where, we share stories about police officers, the good and the bad, but we have to understand they're out there on the front line and they are getting COVID, and that number is very high.
It's the second year in a row that COVID is the leading cause of death for law enforcement officials. And so I think that it'll be interesting to see if those who back the blue, who are very staunch supporters of that mantra and that phrasing, are as adamant now that we're seeing these record numbers of police officers dying in comparison to the other things that they kind of stick on, talking about how their interactions with, some black folks end in their deaths. The numbers do not even compare. And they should be just as adamant about recommending vaccines and protecting the blue when it comes to that as they are when Fox News spends days on headlines doing, other things and talking about things that aren't as bad.
Well, this is the dilemma that our country is in, because you have mandates to where if you don't get vaccinated, you can't come to work. But then the corporations and the police unions and the fire department unions are realizing that, well, if we mandate it, then we're not going to have anybody to protect and serve. We're not going to have people to put out fires. We're not going to have employees to do the job that we need. And this is what a pandemic is. There's no blueprint. There's no book. And we just have to figure this out as we go along. So our country is really facing a daunting task.
Neil, that is so true. A former NFL player choked by police during an arrest in Georgia has reached what's being described as a record amount to settle his lawsuit against the county. The officer who choked Desmond Morrow in 2017 pleaded guilty to battery charges 3 years later and surrendered his law enforcement certification. He was also sentenced to a year of probation and anger management. Morrow, however, said the incident left him with severe migraines and PTSD flashbacks. Morrow was listed on the preseason roster for 2 NFL teams. His lawyer said they're most satisfied the officer would never work in law enforcement again.
Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn says she's concerned about one of Joe Biden's black judicial nominees, all because of his old speeding tickets. Blackburn said she would oppose the nomination of Andre Mathis to the Sixth Circuit Appeals Court because of his rap sheet of speeding tickets. Now, her using that term suggests he has a criminal record, but he doesn't. Mathis told the Senate Judiciary Committee that he's never been arrested or charged with a crime, and that he simply forgot to pay the speeding tickets, which caused his license to be suspended. Blackburn, she failed to mention that last year when she was pulled over by police, she was released immediately after flashing her congressional badge. And Senator Cory Booker, he said he almost laughed at her question and took the opportunity to ask Mathis about his experience driving while black.
Ohio Supreme Court has rejected newly drawn district lines that would give Republicans in the state supermajorities in both legislative chambers. Now, in a divided vote, the court ruled the Redistricting Commission must redraw the boundaries within 10 days to satisfy requirements set by a 2015 amendment to the state's constitution. Now, the law requires a proportional distribution of districts that reflects Ohio's 54% Republican and 46% Democrat split. Now, Democrats and voting rights groups called the ruling a victory. At least 3 lawsuits challenged the new maps as unconstitutional gerrymandering.